What if I told you that Elisha lived one of the deepest spiritual journeys in the Biblia without ever seeking attention or recognition? The Historia Biblica of his life reveals something unsettling. The greatest miracles were not born from ambition, but from communion with God. While many desire God's power, few desire the process that shapes the heart. And that is exactly where Elisha stands apart. The Biblia shows that Elisha did not chase spiritual fame. He pursued God's presence. Every step of his journey reveals a man who chose to remain faithful when no one was watching, obedient when it made no sense, and sensitive when pain knocked at the door. The Historia Biblica makes it clear that the supernatural was not the ultimate goal, but the natural outcome of a life aligned with God. Here is the counterintuitive truth. Elisha experienced extraordinary miracles because he never placed miracles at the center. The Biblia teaches that he placed God at the center instead. And when that happens, everything changes. Faith stops being mere words. Obedience stops feeling like a burden, and communion stops being a ritual. The Historia Biblica confronts us with a quiet but powerful question. What truly sits at the center of our spiritual life? Throughout this content, you will see that the lessons from Elisha are neither theoretical nor distant. They speak to real crises, difficult decisions, pride, pain, practical faith, and daily dependence on God. The Biblia remains alive, and the Historia Biblica of Elisha proves that a life of communion is still the surest path to true transformation. So, before we dive in, do this. Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Here, the goal is not religious entertainment, but real spiritual growth rooted in the Biblia. And now comes the invitation that changes everything. Are you willing to walk with God the way Elisha did? When the Bible introduces Elisha, it does not begin with applause or public recognition. It begins with an ordinary man in a field, holding a plow, living a simple routine. Biblical history reveals that God often calls people while they are being faithful in ordinary things. This speaks directly to you. The calling does not arise from spiritual idleness, but from consistency. God watches those who remain faithful, even when no one else is watching. Scripture declares this clearly when it says, "So he departed from there and found Elisha the son of Shaphat, who was plowing with 12 yoke of oxen before him, and he with the 12th. Then Elijah passed by him and threw his mantle on him, as written in the first book of Kings, chapter 19, verse 19. The Bible shows that God steps into Elisha's life without warning, teaching that the calling does not depend on human preparation, but on spiritual readiness. When the mantle falls upon Elisha, it is not merely a symbolic gesture, it is a divine summons. Biblical history reveals that the mantle represents authority, continuity, and spiritual responsibility. God was saying, "Now it is your turn." This directly confronts a comfortable faith. The Bible makes it clear that a calling is not a social promotion. It is a commitment that redefines one's entire life. Elisha's response is immediate and profound. He asks to say goodbye, but he does not negotiate obedience. He burns the plow and removes every possibility of returning. Biblical history teaches that there is no spiritual progress without renunciation. God does not share the heart with hidden reserves. Either you respond fully, or you remain only an admirer of stories that never become reality in your life. This passage confronts you directly. What plow is still holding your heart? What security do you insist on keeping, even though you know God is calling you to something greater? The Bible teaches that those who try to follow God while clinging to the past become paralyzed. Biblical history shows that true obedience requires decisive choices. When Elijah is taken away, Elisha tears his clothes. This act reveals transition, maturity, and spiritual responsibility. The Bible shows that there comes a time when faith can no longer be borrowed. Biblical history teaches that God does not want you to live dependent on the faith of others, but to embrace your calling with conviction and responsibility. Elisha's request for a double portion is not born out of ambition, but out of spiritual understanding. He desires to carry the inheritance and the mission forward. The Bible confirms this moment when it says, "And so it was, When they had crossed over, that Elijah said to Elisha, "Ask what I shall do for you, before I am taken away from you." Elisha said, "Please let a double portion of your spirit be upon me," as recorded in the second book of Kings, chapter 2, verse 9. Biblical history makes it clear that those who understand the calling do not flee from responsibility. When Elisha finds himself alone before the Jordan River, he must act by his own faith. He strikes the waters and asks where the Lord is. The Bible shows that true faith is revealed through action. The miracle does not happen before the step, but after it. Biblical history teaches that God responds to obedience, not hesitation. This message speaks directly to you today. The Bible was not written merely for information, but for transformation. If God is calling you into a deeper life, the first step is practical obedience, commitment to the Word, a life of prayer, and decisions aligned with God's will. Elisha did not have all the answers, but he had the willingness to obey. Biblical history closes this moment with a non-negotiable truth. God does not call the qualified, He qualifies the called. Elisha begins as an ordinary man, but becomes an instrument of the supernatural because he chose obedience. The Bible continues to echo this calling today, and this response opens the way for us to understand how God works when resources seem insufficient and the impossible stands before us. The Bible reveals that God is not distant from daily struggles. In biblical history, provision is not an abstract idea, it is a concrete expression of God's care. When Elisha encounters the widow in debt, the situation is urgent, painful, and humanly unsolvable. She has nothing left except a small jar of oil. And this is where God often begins, when human resources have reached their absolute limit. Scripture records her cry when it says, "Now the wife of one of the sons of the prophets cried out to Elisha, saying, 'Your servant my husband is dead, and you know that your servant feared the Lord. And the creditor is coming to take my 2 sons to be his slaves,' as written in the second book of Kings, chapter 4, verse 1. The Bible shows that faith begins with honesty. God responds not to pretending strength, but to sincere surrender. Elisha does not dismiss her pain, nor does he offer empty comfort. He asks a confronting question: "What do you have in your house?" Biblical history teaches that God often uses what seems insignificant. The miracle does not begin with abundance, but with obedience. The oil multiplies only when the woman starts pouring. The Bible makes it clear. Provision flows when faith is put into motion. This speaks directly to you. God rarely multiplies what you hide, but He multiplies what you surrender. The Bible shows that empty vessels are required for divine filling. In biblical history, lack is not the problem, unavailability is. When you make room for God's action, He supplies beyond what logic can explain. Another moment of provision appears when Elisha heals the waters of Jericho. The land was good, but the water was bad. Life could not flourish. This reveals a powerful truth in the Bible. Sometimes the environment looks promising, yet something essential is corrupted. God's intervention restores what sustains life. In biblical history, God does not only bless people, He heals systems that affect them. The Word records this moment saying, "Then the men of the city said to Elisha, 'Please notice, the situation of this city is pleasant, as my Lord sees, but the water is bad, and the ground barren.' And he said, 'Bring me a new bowl, and put salt in it.' So they brought it to him, as written in the second book of Kings, chapter 2, verses 19 and 20. The Bible shows that God's solution may appear simple, but its effect is transformative. God uses salt ordinary, overlooked to heal the source. Biblical history teaches that God's power is not limited by simplicity. When Elisha throws salt into the spring, the waters are healed permanently. The Bible makes it clear that when God restores, He restores completely. What was once a source of death becomes a source of life. This message confronts you again. Where is the lack in your life? Where does provision seem impossible? The Bible teaches that God is attentive to material needs, emotional burdens, and family struggles. In biblical history, miracles of provision are not rare events. They are revelations of God's character. God does not promise excess without purpose. but He promises sufficiency with peace. The Bible shows that obedience activates supply. When the widow follows instructions exactly, the oil does not stop until there are no more vessels. Biblical history teaches that God's provision often matches your level of expectation and obedience. This chapter prepares your heart to trust again. The Bible invites you to place your limitations before God without fear. Elisha's miracles reveal a God who sees, cares, and intervenes. And this understanding opens the door to something even deeper, because when provision sustains life, God also reveals His power to restore life itself, even in the midst of pain and loss. The Bible reveals that God does not withdraw when pain arrives. He draws near. In biblical history, the deepest moments of revelation occur when hope seems to have been taken away. The Shunammite woman's house, once filled with promise, is now wrapped in the silence of loss. Elisha enters this scene, not with empty speeches, but with persevering faith. This speaks directly to you. God remains present even when life appears to have come to a halt. Scripture records the scene with sobriety and truth when it says, "So when Elisha came into the house, there was the child, lying dead on his bed," as written in the second book of Kings, chapter 4, verse 32. The Bible does not soften reality. Biblical history does not hide pain. It shows that faith does not deny death, but confronts the impossible with trust in God. Standing before a lifeless body, Elisha shuts the door. This detail matters. The Bible teaches that there are moments when faith requires silence, intimacy, and focus. Biblical history reveals that not every miracle happens in public. Some spiritual battles are won away from the eyes of others, in the secret place where only God sees and responds. Elisha stretches himself over the child mouth to mouth, eyes to eyes, hands to hands. This act reveals identification, surrender, and perseverance. The Bible shows that the prophet does not give up after the first attempt. He prays, persists, walks back and forth, and prays again. Biblical history teaches that true faith is not hurried. Those who believe remain steadfast, even when the miracle seems delayed. The sacred text continues by saying, "Then the child sneezed 7 times, and the child opened his eyes," as recorded in the second book of Kings, chapter 4, verse 35. The Bible shows that life returns in God's timing. Biblical history reveals that the impossible is never final when God enters the scene. Where there was death, God establishes restoration. This passage confronts you deeply. How many areas of your life appear lifeless? Buried dreams, broken relationships, weakened faith. The Bible teaches that God has power over every form of death, including those that are invisible to the eyes. Biblical history shows that God's silence is not absence, it is preparation for the manifestation of His power. The Shunammite woman does not scream, accuse, or collapse in despair. She seeks the man of God. The Bible reveals a faith that moves even while wounded. Biblical history teaches that those who learn to trust God in the promise also learn to trust Him in pain. Mature faith does not run from suffering, it runs toward the right presence. This miracle shows that God responds to perseverance. Elisha does not withdraw when nothing happens immediately. The Bible teaches that the faith which generates life is the faith that remains when everything says it is over. Biblical history reveals that the waiting season is not loss, it is process. This message speaks directly to you today. The Bible does not promise a life without loss, but it promises a God who reigns over loss. Elisha becomes an instrument of life because he trusts in the God of life. Biblical history reminds us that no situation is beyond the reach of the Lord. This chapter opens your eyes to an essential truth. God does not merely provide, He restores life itself. The Bible reveals that the same God who sustains also resurrects. And this understanding prepares the way for us to see how healing often begins when pride falls and simple obedience is embraced. The Bible reveals that God's healing does not always begin in the body, but in the heart. In biblical history, Naaman's disease was not only physical, it was also spiritual. He was a powerful man, respected, victorious in battle, yet a leper. This confronts you directly. Position, status, or recognition do not exempt anyone from the need for God. The Bible makes it clear that everyone, without exception, needs grace. Scripture presents Naaman as great in human eyes, yet limited before heaven. Biblical history teaches that God often allows a visible weakness to expose an invisible dependence. Naaman had resources, influence, and letters of recommendation, but none of these could heal him. The Bible shows that what humanity values does not impress God. When Naaman arrives before Elisha, something unexpected happens. The prophet does not come out to meet him personally. Instead, he sends a messenger. This detail matters. The Bible reveals that God confronts pride before releasing healing. Biblical history teaches that often the greatest obstacle is not the disease itself, but the expectation of how God should act. The sacred text records the simple instruction saying, "Go and wash in the Jordan 7 times, and your flesh shall be restored to you, and you shall be clean," as written in the 2nd book of Kings, chapter 5, verse 10. The Bible shows that God's command was not complicated, but it demanded obedience. The simplicity of the path exposed the depth of the test. Naaman becomes angry. He expected something more elaborate, something worthy of his position. Biblical history teaches that pride always resists God's simple methods. The Bible reveals that many miss miracles not because of a lack of faith, but because of excessive self-sufficiency. God does not share His glory with human vanity. At that moment, correction comes through humble servants. They call Naaman to reason. The Bible shows that God uses simple voices to guide proud hearts. Biblical history teaches that listening to counsel can be the first step toward transformation. God often speaks through means that challenge our pride. Naaman chooses to obey. He goes down to the Jordan and washes 7 times. This act reveals surrender. The Bible shows that healing happens on the path of obedience, not argument. Biblical history teaches that going down precedes being lifted up. Those who humble themselves before God find true restoration. The text confirms the miracle, saying, "So he went down and dipped 7 times in the Jordan, according to the saying of the man of God, and his flesh was restored like the flesh of a little child. And he was clean," as recorded in the 2nd book of Kings, chapter 5, verse 14. The Bible reveals that God does not merely heal, He restores completely. This passage confronts you today. How many times has God pointed you toward a simple path, yet you resisted out of pride? Biblical history teaches that true transformation begins when the heart surrenders. The Bible shows that God is not seeking spiritual performance, but sincere obedience. This chapter leaves a clear truth. The healing God offers goes beyond the body, reaching the soul and redefining faith. Elisha becomes an instrument because he trusts God's method rather than human expectations. And this lesson prepares the way for us to understand how these truths did not remain in the past, but continue to shape daily life for those who believe. The Bible makes it clear that miracles were not recorded merely as historical memory, but as living instruction. Biblical history is not an archive of ancient facts. It is a spiritual guide for the present. The acts performed by God through Elisha point to principles that remain active today. God has not changed, and His way of working still reveals who He is and how He expects His people to live. The miracles of Elisha teach that God acts in everyday life. An axe head that floats, a lost tool restored, a practical need resolved. The Bible shows that God cares about details many consider small. Biblical history reveals that the supernatural is not separated from ordinary life. It enters the ordinary when there is dependence and obedience. The text records this divine care by saying, "But as one was cutting down a tree, the iron axe head fell into the water, and he cried out and said, 'Alas, Master!' For it was borrowed," as written in the 2nd book of Kings, chapter 6, verse 5. The Bible teaches that God responds even when the pain arises from something simple, yet necessary. Elisha's response reveals an essential spiritual principle. He asks where the axe head fell and throws a piece of wood. Biblical history shows that God requires attention, responsibility, and action. The miracle occurs at the exact place of the loss. The Bible teaches that ignoring the problem does not produce a solution. Facing it with faith opens the door to divine intervention. These accounts are not isolated. The Bible affirms that everything was written for spiritual formation. This becomes clear when we read, "For whatever things were written before were written for our learning, that we, through the patience and comfort of the Scriptures, might have hope," as recorded in the letter of Paul to the Romans, chapter 15, verse 4. Biblical history continues to teach, correct, and strengthen faith today. The miracles of Elisha point to an active faith. It is not a passive faith that merely waits, but a faith that obeys, acts, and trusts. The Bible shows that God works where there is human cooperation aligned with His will. Biblical history teaches that faith without movement becomes barren. This message directly confronts daily practice. Trusting God is not merely believing it, it is living consistently with what one believes. The Bible reveals that compassion, obedience, and spiritual sensitivity are marks of mature faith. The miracles of Elisha were not meant to exalt the prophet, but to reveal God's character through concrete actions. Living these lessons today means allowing God to guide decisions, relationships, and priorities. Biblical history shows that those who walk with God become instruments of hope for others. The Bible teaches that true faith overflows and reaches those around us, even in difficult environments. The miracles also reveal responsibility. God acts, but people must respond. The Bible shows that God honors those who take seriously what they have received. Biblical history teaches that it is not enough to admire God's power. One must live according to His principles. This chapter closes the accounts, but it does not close the calling. The Bible continues to invite you to transform learning into daily practice. The miracles of Elisha do not belong only to the past. They echo as an invitation to live a living, obedient, and hope-filled faith. And this response prepares the heart for something greater, because every truth embraced demands a practical decision before God. As we walk through this biblical history, it becomes impossible not to notice that miracles are not the final point, but the path God uses to reveal who He is and who we are before Him. The Bible does not present Elisha as a distant hero, but as someone who answered the call, trusted when resources were lacking, persevered when pain arrived, humbled himself when pride needed to fall, and lived out a practical daily faith. Every miracle carries a lesson that crosses time and reaches you today. Perhaps what spoke most strongly to your heart was the call that required leaving the plow behind. Or maybe it was the provision that appeared when everything seemed insufficient. It may have been the restoration of life in the midst of pain, or the healing of Naaman that confronted areas of pride still resisting simple obedience. This is what the Bible does. It does not merely inform, it confronts, heals, and transforms. Biblical history does not change, but we are called to change in response to it. These passages leave one truth undeniable. Faith is not a speech. It is a daily decision. It is not only believing that God can act, but living as those who trust that He is acting. The miracles of Elisha remind us that God continues to work where there is obedience, humility, perseverance, and a willingness to live what the Word teaches. Often, the greatest miracle is not what God does around us, but what He builds within us. Now the question is for you. Which of these lessons spoke most deeply to your heart today? Was it the calling, the provision, the restoration of life, or the healing that flows from humility? Share your reflection in the comments. Your testimony may strengthen someone else who is walking this journey of faith. If this content blessed your life and helped you see the Bible and biblical history in a deeper and more practical way, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. That way, you will continue learning, growing, and being strengthened by content that is not superficial, but truly transformative. May what you learned here not remain only in your mind, but become a living practice every single day.